Dr. Henry Walton Jones Jr. is as enduring a pop culture icon as you could hope to find, perhaps in a dark cave surrounded by cobwebs. I bet at least one person who watches this video has seen one of his adventures in the past year, be it on DVD, be it on the TV, be it on streaming, while almost none of you have watched an episode of The Upper Hand. So that's not a pop culture icon that you'll be thinking about anytime soon. And that therefore proves the point completely and is just science. Also, there are no The Upper Hand video games, but there are tons of Indiana Jones video games. What would an Upper Hand game look like? I don't know, but there would be more than likely a Honor Blackman minigame where she would probably be lusting over younger man flesh. Enough mentions then of The Upper Hand. Enough, I say. But there's not just a lot of Indiana Jones video games, but a hell of a lot of tributes too. You've got the modern ones, of course. You've got the Tomb Raiders and the Uncharted games. They're fairly well known to take their cues from the adventures of the treasure-hunting, whip-happy archaeologist. Then you've got a whole litany of video games going back through its history with a character that looks suspiciously like Indiana Jones, doing some very Indiana Jonesy things, be it whipping, grabbing idols, beating up the locals, Nazis or other roustabouts, or exploring various dark places filled with creatures that would make you screech like a big girl's blouse if you saw one of them in your shed while hunting for a pair of pliers to bleed your radiator with. I mean, fair's fair. Indiana himself is a hodgepodge of various old serials, book characters and movies, so he, nor George Lucas or Steven Spielberg can be too upset with whichever video game company comes along and says, "Oh, I'd like to scrape off a bit of that delicious IP to swell my own coffers with, thank you, please." The Indiana Jones films are held together by Harrison Ford's performance at his most charismatic best. But it's the absolutely ridiculous set pieces that make you gawp and want to see more. Whether he's careening about in a minecart, taking out a cavalcade of Nazis whilst trying to keep his balance on a speeding desert truck, even hiding in a fridge to escape the ill effect of an atom bomb. Maybe we shouldn't talk about that one. Indiana has never been one to doubt his own split-second decisions that are almost certain to not actually work in real life. This is the essence of a good old action adventure, and whilst it's easy to replicate the pure thrill ride silliness of daft Indiana Jones style stunts on modern tech in titles like Uncharted 4 and Tomb Raider, and indeed in Indiana Jones's recent digital venture The Great Circle, on the 8-bits and 16-bits Henry Jr. more often than not had to just amble about whipping wildlife and clambering up craggy ledges in a very sedate manner. There was one game, though, that understood the essence of Jones's bombast, even in those early days, and it ramped up that bombast to 100. That game? The Cliffhanger, Edward Randy. The Cliffhanger, Edward Randy, was a 1990 action arcade game developed and published by Data East. The game was headed up by Minoru Sano in his first project leading role. Amongst other titles that Sano headed up was the excellent Heavy Smash. Though it's not a game where you have to have intercourse with a girl who's on her period, but instead it's a very good future sports game which you need to go and play, because if you die without playing it, then something is missing in your life. It is that good. Edward Randy is a teenage boy residing in 1930s Europe, whose life is turned upside down when preparing for a date with his very sexy lady friend Jennifer. You see, a mysterious woman called Charlotte has sought refuge in the house of the young man about town. It turns out that she is the granddaughter of an elderly scientist who's been cajoled into working with a Nazi army adjacent squad led by the villainous General Dark Ogre. That's an unusual name. Mind you, he is German. So, yes. Anyway, the scientist has been working on a weapon of mass destruction, and upon realising that making weapons of mass destruction is probably a shithouse move, he decides to then give a MacGuffin prism stone that is required to make that weapon of mass destruction work to his granddaughter, who obviously, well, has just so happened to go into the house of the most agile whip proficient young man in the world. And well, he's going to have to pretty much stop the complete annihilation of all the non-fascistic life on this here planet. Why? Well, it's what heroes do, isn't it? Edward Randy is an action platform game controlled with 8 directions and 2 buttons. Whip and jump. That doesn't sound a lot, but you can whip in all of those 8 directions and do several context-based moves, like swinging about, sliding around like Billy-O, and, well, it's all very smooth and fun to play. You're given 1 life per credit, but a whole load of health that can be replenished by putting a sock to the gobs of a number of fascist foot soldiers, but is obviously reduced a bit when those fascist foot soldiers get their licks in. It's a simultaneous 2-player game, with the other guy playing as, well, also Edward Randy, but in a different shirt. Yes. Starting out in a madcap boat chase as Charlotte is grabbed by the goons of the Dark Ogre, it's here when you realise how individual a game Edward Randy is, especially for its time. The whole level takes place, you see, on this boat. There's no getting onto a jetty or fighting through this pretty European city on foot. You'll be putting whip to purpose atop this runaway boat. Oh, until the end bit when you have to jump from that boat onto this rather Art Deco looking gold Nazi train. There you will meet Dark Ogre, who will offer Charlotte's life in exchange for the stone. Edward, not realising that he might well have brought about the destruction of the entire world, is told then by Charlotte to go and get that stone back. It is relentless, this first stage, bringing wave after wave after wave after wave of wrong'un to bash into the river. The perspective will occasionally change, so the boat is seen going into the screen, and at that point you get to see lots of scaling scenery down each side, a bit like the of-the-time racing games like Outrun and things like that. The gameplay doesn't alter when it does this, it's just the view. It's breathtaking arcade adventure at its very best. Level 2, and Edward has acquired a car, and we are once again looking at a into the screen perspective that this time doesn't change. You'll always be viewing it from the front. The gameplay is still the same. You're still on a vehicle while standing up and whipping away. This time you're driving as well, though. Now, you can use the car as a battering ram, and you can indeed fall off of it, at which point you have to sprint in front of it and then jump onto the car. This will lose some of your life, so make sure you don't make a habit of doing that. Troopers are dropped from planes on motorbikes. A tank round or a cliff edge will occasionally force the car to make a dramatic leap. The road dips behind Randy's vehicle, giving it a nice change in perspective and a bit of speed. It's just a frenetic spectacle for the 5-minute duration of this level. And that's a good word as well to use, spectacle. This is a game of pure spectacle. Then there's a smooth transition as your car is bashed off of the road, and you instead leap onto the front of a cavalcade of approaching trucks. It never stops. It just gets more and more ridiculous, this game. Case in point, after this, Randy finds himself in the location that the weapon is being built in, as he scales up a mountain on some very, very shaky looking girders. As you climb this array of swinging bars, the hordes keep on coming, and because this is a data east game and therefore as mad as a chimpanzee after a 6-pack of Monster energy drinks, you'll be swatted by the metal arms of what turns out to be, yes, the weapon of mass destruction is a giant Nazi death machine robot. Thinking he has whipped that robot into oblivion, Edward escapes in the next stage on one of those boats that can sort of rest in the river. You know, like the one at the beginning of Raiders of the Lost Ark. Yep, the Indiana Jones references still keep on coming. Only the robot is, of course, not yet downed because, you shouldn't be able to take out a giant Nazi killer robot with just a whip. Well, until you do this time as you go underneath a waterfall. So yeah, finally the aquaplane takes off, but so does a fleet of Nazi planes, so you best do battle with the troops on those, jumping from plane to plane at very, very high altitudes, punching Nazis and dealing with villainous ballerinas like this is Strider or something. The scenery changes as you're doing this, going from stormy clouds to clear skies, and the game is not planning to let up just yet. After dealing with an airborne Nazi death machine, finally Dark Ogre decides to have his final confrontation with you in the most inappropriate of places, not in a men's toilet, but on the wings of a very tiny little bomber plane. The thing continually spins, so make sure that Edward Randy has ignored all the laws of physics that he learnt at secondary school by jumping directly up into the air, which of course would stop you from falling off of it when it does that spin. Keep whipping the villain like Billy O and eventually the general will be dead. Edward can then head back to terra firma, finally putting his feet onto the ground for once, before he gets a nasty left hook from his missus for hooking up with the Nazi scientist's granddaughter. Yes, that's it. It is a masterpiece of presentation all round, with Edward even getting his own Raiders March-alike theme tune that plays at key moments. It hits everything perfectly. Now, did it get any home conversions? No, sir, it did not. And rightly so. There's nothing to this game, really. It wouldn't work as a home conversion because, well, there's not a lot really to the game. It's hollow, silly fun that you'll play once, enjoy yourself, but then never have the need to play it again. There were no sequels either, so Edward Randy, I hardly knew thee. An absolutely barnstorming, thrill-packed hoot that tips its fedora at Indiana Jones in a good, cool way, like Indy would, not one of those fellas who goes "milady" and has a neck beard. Now go and play it and then never play it again afterwards. It's great. Now where's my The Upper Hand game? I want to be Joe McGann.